There's a lot of hype, hand waving, and ink being spilled about artificial intelligence in business, and enterprises are taking the bait. According to a 2019 report by Gartner, AI implementation has grown by an astounding 270% in the past 4 years and has tripled in the last year alone. By 2021, IDC researchers predict that organizations will spend $52.2 billion annually on IA-related products. We spent decades feeding AI vast amounts of data and propping it up with energy-hungry data centers. But despite its speed and smarts, AI lacks one critical element: common sense. AI can't simply replicate decision-making abilities of its flesh and blood counterparts. It's not ready for prime time, but the human machine is. Today, my guest, John Wood, and I discuss why understanding AI development is important to leaders, how leaders can leverage the risk associated to AI, how to transition workers from one job to another in the AI boom, how to break the traditional business paradigm through AI, amongst many other topics. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 101, Embrace AI as a Human Machine with John Wood. Welcome all to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's your host and founder, Scott McCarthy. And if I sound off a little bit, my apologies. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold here. But good news is I recorded this podcast episode before I had this cold. So at least you won't hear it for the entire episode upcoming. But today we're talking about a pretty important topic, right? AI. AI is super important. They keep saying it's going to be the next greatest thing, or it's here now, or we don't know exactly what is in the future with AI. But I think it's super important for us as leaders to be on top of these next generation technological ideas or solutions or problems. And that's why I reached out to John Wood. John is a graduate at NYU School of Law, and he's earned his bachelor's degrees in English philosophy, member of New York's the Texas State Bar Association. So he's got a lot of the legal background to this. And he's also the co-author of the Humankind Machines in the Future Enterprise, where they dive into the AI issue deeply. So that's why I brought him on the show for you, because you need to be thinking about this. You need to be thinking about this now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, next quarter, next year, whatever. But you need to be thinking of AI now. And that's why John's here, right? So him and I have a great episode. As you can tell, my voice is pretty shot. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm just going to tell you, you know what? Sit back, relax, and enjoy my interview with John Wood discussing how you can embrace AI as a human machine. John, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. Great to have you here tonight.
It's great to be here, Scott.
Awesome. We're talking today about a topic which is kind of new, but not new at the same breath. But it's definitely, gaining traction, I would say. It's becoming more and more interesting, more and more popular, and more powerful. And that is the effects, basically, of artificial intelligence or AI in the workplace, in the world, everywhere. So the first thing I want to dive into is, from a leader standpoint, why is understanding this important for them?
I think leaders have a responsibility to exercise situational awareness. So in order to actually take care of the people in your charge, or to take care of the organization that you're leading, you have to understand the strategic environment in which you're operating. And that means the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that you're faced with. And AI is on that chart pretty much in all four of those categories. AI can be a strength and a weakness to an organization. It can be an opportunity and a threat. So any leader of any organization needs to be aware of it. And I analogize it to an evolutionary pressure. So artificial intelligence is going to function to enterprise like an evolutionary pressure on that enterprise. That's going to mean it's going to need to compete in new ways in order to survive. And it will be subject to evolution. It'll have to mutate in order to survive.
Mm. Yeah, and you've seen that in the past, right? We've seen that already. We can see it now. If you go to a grocery store, self-checkouts are there, and that's part of artificial intelligence in these machines, right? And that is
automation is already changing the landscape of business. And the thing is, it's unlike all the iterative sort of incremental changes that we've seen in technology over the last several decades. It's not just a new cell phone. It's not just a better PC. It's like the steam engine changed industry completely. I mean, people that worked in horse stables were very scared of what that was going to do to their jobs. And we have a lot of that economic anxiety right now because it is such a fundamental transformation. And in a way, it's unlike anything historically since the printing press. So, there's going to be a tremendous amount of changes underway, and it really does put a significant burden on leaders to be aware of it and to think proactively about how to manage this strategically. I mean, my background is a corporate counsel, so I'm very sensitive to risk, enterprise risk, but if lawyers ran the show, they'd stop all risk and there would be no economic activity at all. So, I'm used to thinking about this from the perspective of how do you advise business leaders to leverage this risk? And I think there's a lot of promise right now with AI. In fact, I'm probably a little bit more optimistic than a lot of the commentators on big tech in terms of the promise of this technology.
So let's go down that rabbit hole, shall we? So how can leaders leverage the risk associated with artificial intelligence today?
Well, there's a digital transformation underway in the economy. And if your business model wasn't conceived in the last 5 years, you're probably already on the way of blockbuster video and that it's just going to be obsolete soon. If there's something that you do that's routine and repetitive, it is susceptible to being automated. And that's true now, whether it's a physical task and we can design a robot to carry out that task, as well as a computational task where we can now program an algorithm so that if certain conditions are input, this should be the output. And so you can actually send an email to a bot. It's called robotic process automation. You can send an email to a bot that works for your company and give them an assignment and attach certain documents to your email, and it'll automatically turn around the work product that you're asking for. So that kind of low-hanging fruit is already out there. So that's one way that leaders can leverage artificial intelligence to make their workforce more efficient. If it's a routine process, it can be automated, and you can liberate human resources from doing that, what I think is a boring task. Let them be more creative, use their emotional intelligence, and basically free up human resources to do more important things.
Yeah, definitely see that more and more in the world today, right? And I actually sat in a presentation from one of the Sobeys family members. His first name's slipping my mind, unfortunately. Anyway, but the point of the matter is he was talking about how one of their large warehouses is essentially completely turned over from people walking, getting things off the shelves, doing pallets, loading up on transports, to all machines doing this for them, robots and stuff like that, going and doing all this work. And the workforce there now has gone from essential laborers to having a handful of software engineers, and that is it. So you see that more and more.
So people are still going to be required. There might be fewer people required, and they might have a different skill set. So reskilling reskilling your workforce, upskilling your workforce is important. But learning how to leverage those machines to make your company more profitable, that's definitely going to happen. So in certain sectors of the economy, there's no real way to sugarcoat this. A lot of human beings are going to lose their jobs. In the same way that bank tellers, they got replaced by ATMs, and you mentioned the automated checkout aisle. That's going to happen. Long haul truckers, those kind of jobs, we're going to have robots that do that. They don't get tired, and they're not. I'm not saying truckers are professional drivers, but humans in general are not great at moving a 1-ton vehicle at high speed in a safe manner. We're so easily distracted. So there's a lot of things that absolutely go the way of the robots. We call it getting bot sourced instead of outsourced. It's a task that people used to do. Now a robot does it. A lot of things probably should be bot sourced. It would make the economy more efficient. It'd make these companies more efficient. But what I think we need to spend more time talking about is what all of those human resources are going to do when they're no longer required to carry pallets from one part of the warehouse to another, when that's been outsourced. And I think that really we need to be creative and I think cautiously optimistic about that. The economy isn't necessarily caring right now. That's one area where care-oriented jobs we should see a lot more of. And there's plenty of research that remains to be done in terms of identifying that, but it's ultimately going to be dictated by the private sector, and it's up to entrepreneurs. The field is wide open right now for entrepreneurs to find ways to leverage human resources that meet real human needs in ways that robots cannot. Right? Robots can't really express care very well. They can't read a room. They can't really intuit through things. You can have a super smart computer that can make a brilliant chess move, but it'll do that while the room is burning down around it. And that's not very smart, right? So the robots have this inability to perceive context. So there's always going to be a room for humans to be handling the robots, to be interpreting them. And it's more likely that we're going to see, especially in white collar settings, humans working with machines instead of being replaced by machines. And that's it's a little more nuanced. Most people want to talk, and the journalists that cover this want to talk in absolutes, and it's a little bit more sensationalist to do that. But I think that leadership is going to have to realize it's not just about saying, oh, I can hire a robot to do this cheaper. It's about how do I leverage the resources available to us to deliver the most value to our investors, to deliver the most value to society. And I think that's really where the competitive advantage is going to be. I've heard of lights out warehouses now, where you've got a warehouse that's pretty much entirely been automated. And that's great, but that's not all that impressive. I mean, that should be happening. And then I think a real meaningful discussion is, what do we do next?
You mentioned something that was piqued my interest, and basically what that is you were talking about how as things become more and more automated, essentially people lose their jobs. But like you said, the bigger question is, how do we transition these people? How do they go from being that laborer on the floor to a new type of value worker within the organization?
Well, part of this is the responsibility of business schools and training the future generation of leaders. They need to be training them to not just have programming skills, because soon machine learning algorithms are going to be writing the code. And so if we turn everyone into a coder, they're going to be one of the first classes of workers to lose their job, as ironic as that is. We talk about coding as if it's this crucial skill set. But and I'm oversimplifying, but once the code's written, it just needs to be maintained. And that's the kind of thing that you can bot source. So what we need are humans that come out of school ready to work with teams, ready to exercise leadership skills, capable of communicating interculturally, which just means they need to be really understanding of human nature and communication skills, the soft skills that I think there's been a trend actually leaning away from for several decades, where we're turning people into robots. We're thinking, think in terms of calculus, think in terms of spreadsheets, learn to code, become a quant, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have STEM. I fully support, science, technology, engineering, math, but also art and cultural studies and philosophy and ethics. And I think so. Business school leaders need to be focusing on turning out well-rounded human beings capable of using technology. And so that's one thing. On the other end of the spectrum, the businesses themselves and what those leaders should be doing to accept that workforce, and that's where they can be really reimagining what the work systems look like. I think for a long time we've been turning people into cogs that fit within a work system, and the people are being designed to fit within the system. And what we need to be doing is reimagining and rebuilding those systems so that humans and their uniquely human skill set can thrive and flourish within that work system. And that's going to happen once we start deploying artificial intelligence to do things that are repetitive, like big data, or like automated tasks, or that require big data processing and volumes that most human beings can't really effectively manage. And those things computers are really good at. So in a phrase, business leaders need to leverage Moravec's paradox by applying Kasparov's law in order to create organizational superintelligence. That is the key to competing in the 22nd century. I use 3 key terms there, and we can break them all down in turn. But if you want to learn more about that, just read the Humachine. We unpack all of that.
No, definitely. Let's go that way. Let's break those down a bit and unpack them for the listener there, because I'm interested. So I'm sure the listener is interested too.
Great. So Moravec's paradox, it's essentially the fact about the world that where humans are naturally gifted, machines really struggle. And we have a hard time building machines that can do what comes naturally to us. And then whereas machines can be very effective at certain things, human beings struggle. So being able to perform a physical task in a high temperature environment, or being able to process vast amounts of information accurately and quickly without any mistakes. That's hard for most human beings to do. I mean, some people that are, far down on the autism spectrum have this amazing gift and they're able to do that, like Rain Man. But most people struggle with that kind of task, whereas a calculator is instantaneous, no problem. So Moravec's paradox, I think that for a long time we've struggled, and we're trying to sort of break this paradox or to overcome it. And I think that is in vain. I think that the paradox is actually a fundamental fact about the world and about intelligence. And that instead of trying to resolve the paradox, we should embrace it. And just recognize that machines are never going to be able to do what humans can do, like general intelligence, the ability to intuit, to understand context, to figure things out without being told specifically how to do it or what end to search for. Those kind of things humans do naturally. We evolved that way. Our brains, it wasn't easy. It took 1 billion years of evolution, but that's where we're at. Instead of trying to program computers to do that, I think we should just accept the fact that Moravec's paradox is true. And so we should, and the pathway that we give in the book is, how do you use that as a source of power instead of something to struggle against? And that's what takes us to Kasparov's law, because that's what Kasparov's law tells us how to do. And I'll explain where that concept comes from. You probably know who Garry Kasparov is, one of the greatest chess players of all time. Mm-hmm. And he was up against Deep Blue, the chess-playing computer program. And it was a pretty disruptive moment in the history of chess as well as computer science when Deep Blue defeated Garry Kasparov. And it put him in a pretty philosophical mood, and he wanted to understand what is the ultimate form of chess playing mastery. And so he staged the ultimate chess tournament to find this out as an empirical study. Is it as a grandmaster chess player? Is it chess champion? Is it a genius human? Is it a chess playing computer engine? Or is it some combination of both? So they staged the ultimate tournament, and they had relaxed rules of entry, so you could have humans teaming up together, humans working with computer programs, or any other kind of variation on that. And two chess players who are virtual unknowns in the competitive chess world. I mean, they played chess at a pub in New England. And one of them wrote a program that studied all of their prior moves. And the program could tell when player A was playing, when the board is laid out in a certain way, player A tends to do better. When it's laid out in another way, player B tends to do better. And so they had decision support from this software that was custom made to them. And these two unknowns ended up winning out the Ultimate Chess Tournament. They defeated grandmasters. It was a huge surprise. Nobody expected them to win, and they did. And it proved what has become known as Kasparov's law, that an ordinary human combined with an ordinary machine using the right process can achieve ordinary results. And in fact, that process, following Kasparov's law, can outperform a superhuman, like a chess-playing genius. So you can take an ordinary person of ordinary intelligence and give them decision support from technology and use the right process, and they can achieve outstanding results. And so that's a cause for optimism. And that's also a way, how do we leverage Moravec's paradox?
That's super interesting and highlights a great point, right? Essential leaders are there to make decisions. So if we can find the right piece of software to pair it with us, then that decision making becomes that much better, because the machine enables you to give you basically the data of, okay, you're in this situation, therefore these are the most likely outcomes, A, B, C, with probably percentages and all that stuff.
That's right. And in a way, we know that humans have biases, right? We've got self-serving bias and availability bias, and these heuristics, they're well documented, and the computers can help de-bias us. And it also helps us to synthesize huge data sets. And in fact, there's a company in America that's selling healthcare technology, and it's two doctors. It's basically a dashboard for providers where the algorithms detect, when a patient has certain health conditions, they're likely also to have these other health conditions. And so when a patient comes in and they're in your panel, it tells the doctor, you know what, you might want to check for this. Even if no symptoms are manifesting, that would have prompted that doctor to check for it. And so by essentially using the algorithms, they're able to manage their population's health better and to drive better quality health and better outcomes and lower the cost of care. And now, of course, the technology doesn't take away the doctor's job, right? It's not practicing medicine. These physicians are still the primary care provider for the patients, but they're having AI augment their powers. And that's what we should be trying to do across all industries. I mean, there's exceptions, like I said, repetitive tasks, you can bot source that, whether it's a physical task or a mental task. But in every other setting where judgment is required, that's extremely hard to program in. And I would say it might be impossible. We might not ever in our lifetime see artificial general intelligence. I'm not optimistic we're going to see that, but that's not a reason to despair or not fund AI studies. I mean, narrow AI is extremely powerful. It's a very powerful tool. It just needs to be used properly. Like, the key to success here is combining the human strengths and the computational strengths of machines.
Right. Now, what's some of the negative sides of this? We've discussed a lot of positives, right? But there's always the other side of the coin. So what are some negative aspects of more and more AI coming into the workforce, the workplace? We discussed loss of jobs. That's a low hanging fruit. We'll get past that one. But what are the other ones that are there?
So there's three that I want to talk about. One of them is privacy. We live in a surveillance capitalist global economy right now. All of our devices, to the extent they're connected to the internet, or what we call the Internet of Things, where it's not just in your computers anymore, it's in your refrigerator, your car, everything seems to be connected to Wi-Fi. That means it's hackable. Okay, that means it's gathering data on you constantly. When you see something called a smart fridge or a smart watch, or smart hyphen insert your noun, that means it is hackable. Okay, it means that it's gathering data on you, the user, and I think that is ultimately consuming the consumer, right? So this digital transformation that swept through the global economy has basically turned the entire world into the panopticon, where we're constantly being watched, and everything we do is being gathered up and under the premise of enhancing the consumer experience, which essentially means making us more likely to engage in some transaction. And at a certain point, the erosion of privacy ends up being an erosion of liberty, because when everything you do is known, in theory, the reason to study something, the theory of science, is to predict it, to explain it, and ultimately to control it. So by living in the surveillance world, we are now being surveilled all the time. And I think that erosion of privacy changes our behavior. Just the fact that we know we're being watched, it changes our behavior. So we're having losses of freedom right now. And it's up to the proper administration of government that won't be abused. It's up to the ethical conviction of business leaders that won't be abused. Now, I don't know how your faith in humanity is doing right now, but I don't necessarily want to put, they'll do the right thing, don't worry. That's not a significant safeguard. So I think that with the proliferation of smart technologies and the Internet of Things, a tremendous amount of data is being gathered about humanity. It's probably, obviously can be used for good things. It can be used for bad things. Maybe in and of itself, this trend is morally neutral, but the tool takes the shape of the master's hand, and that concerns me. Another big, go ahead if you want to react to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, in general, I tend to be the optimist and believe that people are inherently good, but not all I'd say is I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said, neither, in that you're right. It's what the person who has the tool wants to use with it, right?
Exactly.
A pen can be used to write something good, or a pen can be used to stab somebody in the eyeball.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
and Europe has passed the GDPR, and there's some pretty meaningful, at least on paper, there's some meaningful regulations in the GDPR.
mm-hmm.
The only thing remotely like that in America is HIPAA, the healthcare law that protects patient privacy and security, but that is full of loopholes, and,
Right.
and it doesn't pertain to other areas of the economy, just our healthcare data.
Right.
And so it's not adequate regulatory framework. And so we're really just left to, I hope industry doesn't mess with our stuff. And then we get these massive data breaches that just keep happening, where
mm-hmm.
millions of people's sensitive information is just leaked. And so, frankly, I'm hoping we can get some kind of a regulatory initiative. The Internet Data Enforcement Agency, or IDEA, is what I have in mind. And I'm a libertarian in general. I believe in limited government, but I do think that we need a new federal agency, at least in the U.S., that's job is to police the use and abuse of consumer data and what's happening on the internet. And I think that the time for that is long overdue. But you asked about other potential downside risks. And another one that I wanted to talk about is bias. Because the algorithms, machine learning, and neural nets, and all of these are data driven. There's a lot of differences at a technical level. They all kind of fall under the umbrella of AI, but one thing that's in common is they're all data driven. And so if you have data that contains biases, historical biases, and you're feeding that into the algorithm, it's going to lead to biased outputs. And this happened when Microsoft invented an AI and a chatbot, and they put it on Twitter. And I think within 24 hours, Tay, the chatbot, was a racist, homophobe, just a terrible human being, was just talking trash about everyone. And it's like, yeah, that's garbage in, garbage out. Everyone started trolling Tay, and it became a troll. And if you're an AI and your job is to approve bank loans, you're going to end up discriminating against people that have historically been discriminated against, because that's the pattern, and you're just going to follow the pattern. And so bias is a real concern. Using machine learning or using an AI platform to screen job applicants, that's happening now, or it's just using facial recognition software and saying, does this person look like somebody we'd want to hire? Again, I think that can be very dangerous. I think it can lead to bias. I mean, when police forces are using facial recognition technology, they to test it, they scanned in a bunch of professional athletes' faces, and multiple of them were identified as a likely criminal. And it's like, these are like famous athletes that are upstanding citizens, and it's clearly a prejudiced, biased AI system here. And so, the problem is that humans are biased, and our history is full of prejudice and bias, and that's inadvertently getting baked into the systems that we're building. So in any consumer-facing or civilian-facing application, we need to have human override, judgmental override, where they can say, this doesn't reflect our values as a company, this isn't right, so that they can fix that when it happens.
There's a lot of interesting things. And that bias thing was super interesting. Just listening to you and talk about that and talk about the Microsoft, how, end up becoming a troll. It's pretty funny, actually. It's pretty funny and sad at the same time. One, it doesn't say much anything good about Twitter, and two, it doesn't say much good about people in general, right? If all suddenly a piece of software turns into be that mirror reflection of what we don't want it to be. Now,
exactly.
It's interesting you're talking about human override and the need for that, and I completely agree with you. I'm actually currently doing a master's program here in Toronto for the by day I'm Canadian Army, so it's a military master's program, and AI is a big topic of conversation for us right now. The impacts of AI and operations and all that. And one of the things that I constantly bring up is exactly that. There will always be that need for human intervention, because you don't want a piece of software sitting with their metaphorical finger on the red button.
Yeah, I think that's right.
For all the reasons that you talked about, right? So
yeah. And discretion is the better part of valor, right? And sometimes knowing when not to escalate, that is the ultimate right move. And that happened during the Cold War. There was a blip on the radar screen. It looked like nukes were coming, and I believe it was a Soviet soldier had the opportunity to press their retaliatory strike and said no, and it turns out it was false data, like it was a false positive. And so that human override, if it had been an automated system, the world would have ended. Wow. Right? We'd be a big nuclear ashtray. Right. So, and actually I have a story, and of the Apollo 11 mission. There was a big anniversary recently, and they did a retrospective, and a lot of interesting archival footage came up. It was recolorized, and we got to see this in a whole new light, literally. But one of the stories that came out of it about Neil Armstrong was really interesting to me. As you can imagine, most of the space flight was autopiloted, right? From the takeoff and the launch through escaping Earth's gravity to making it to the moon, and then the deploying the lunar lander to the moon's surface. It was all automated. And they had, the heart rate monitors on the astronauts from when they took off through the whole mission. And, these guys were hardcore. Their heart rates were chilling. They're just relaxed. When I'd be freaking out, I'm afraid of heights, and strapped to a rocket, escaping Earth's gravity. I mean, that's pretty intense, and they're just normal, like they're sitting there, reading a book on their porch. And when they get to 30 seconds before touchdown on the moon's surface, Neil Armstrong's heart rate spiked. His heart rate went way up. And as it turns out, he was looking out the portal window and he realized that they were about to crash in a boulder strewn field. And if they didn't land it just right, they were never going to get back off the moon's surface. The lander basically needed to be a gentle touchdown at a 90-degree angle so that it could take off and get them back off the moon. And they were going to crash. And so he grabbed the joystick and he overrode the autopilot and steered them safely into a smooth surface, and they were able to land. But could you imagine the adrenaline rush and the decision to override autopilot that's got you all that way safely, and then to say, I'm going to take my life into my own hands now, override the system, sorry, Houston, but we've got a problem, and to fix it. And that's what he did. And they lived to tell the story, and they made it back. But I think that illustrates that even the greatest scientists gathered together can still make mistakes when they design an automated system, and that you need a human to be monitoring that system and at least have the option of overriding it. And that probably holds true in stock market sales. I mean, that's how you have flash crashes, is because all these trades are just triggered by an automated system. And even though they're irrational, the if-then conditions are met. So they just keep selling or they keep buying, and it leads to crashes. So I think the ethical design of AI builds in off switches. It builds in tripwires and ways to override the system.
That's such a great example, and kind of solidifies definitely the need for leaders to ensure that they do have that override capability one way or another, right? So before
that's a hard choice for them to make, but they need to be able to make that choice.
I want to go into one more aspect of AI, and I definitely want to leverage your expertise with this show. And I'd like to go into some of the legal aspects that leaders need to be aware of regarding AI. It would be wrong for me not to talk about this with a lawyer on the show. So what are some of those things that leaders need to be aware of that they may not even necessarily be aware of today?
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people aren't aware of these risks because the widespread deployment of AI is still on the horizon. It hasn't happened yet. But for me, I think the biggest legal risk is the question of liability, right? Who gets sued? Who has to pay when something goes wrong? Who is at fault? And we can take the self-driving car example, right? And because we've seen a spate of crashes happen. There was a self-driving car made a left-hand turn and hit somebody who was a pedestrian who was carrying their bicycle, because the computer had been trained to recognize a human riding a bike, but this person was carrying the bike on their shoulder across the intersection, and it just didn't pick it up. And so, the question is who gets sued there from the person who was a victim of an AI harm. And that harm could be in the form of, my loan got rejected when I should have gotten the loan, or I feel like I was discriminated against when I was applying for this job, or I got run over by a self-driving car. Who's at fault? Is it the person who is using the technology? So was it the person who should have had their hands on the wheel instead of having it in autopilot? Is it the car dealership that sold the car with this feature that malfunctioned? Is it the car manufacturer that upgraded their car with the computer chip that had this program running on it? Or was it the software designer, the company that designed that software that malfunctioned? And unless we have some clear rules from the federal government, those decisions are going to be decided on a case-by-case basis by jury verdicts, ad hoc and potentially inconsistent across the land. And so that's not good for business, and I don't think it is proper consumer protection. And I'm a big fan of tort law, where you have a duty and somebody breaches that duty and they caused damages. There's your tort, and you can go to court and get compensation for that. And I believe in the tort system in general, But for something like deploying AI and consumer-facing settings, I think we need clear standards at a national, if not international level. And that's going to take a lot of thought leadership on the part of attorneys, people like me, people that own businesses that are stakeholders, the coders who are building these things, as well as consumer protection advocates. We all need to come together and have a conversation about that. And it's, think about the medical context as well. Just, the situations are easy to imagine once you start thinking about this. You have a doctor, they're practicing medicine, and the AI tells them you should remove this, or you should perform this, or you should prescribe this. And the doctor does it, and it leads to a bad outcome. Who do you sue? Was it malpractice for the doctor to follow the robot's recommendation? Should the and then what if you didn't follow the robot's recommendation and there's a bad outcome? Was that malpractice not to use the state of the art in technology? And these are thorny questions, and I don't have a canned answer to them. But I would say that the question of liability is going to be a big driver of investment and regulatory intervention on this front.
Liability is probably the single biggest issue with AI, especially in the self-driving vehicle route. And my personal opinion, that's probably one of the things that's holding it back, why we haven't seen as much development in that realm yet, because no one knows. And going back to the beginning of the conversation, no one wants to be at that risk, wants to take that risk to be deemed the liable one, right? So it's
right. It's a hot potato, and
totally
that's right. And that's why you buy a car with an autopilot function, and it has 1,000 pages of disclaimers and says this is don't rely on this when you're in traffic, or don't use this while you're driving the vehicle, which is like the only time you would use it. And then also it creates perverse incentives because the autopilot systems will just disengage right before impact, so that they can be like, look, we were not engaged at impact. It was on you. And it's like, wait, no, that makes the crash worse. Like it literally took your foot off your proverbial foot off the brakes right before impact, so that you could say I wasn't the one responsible for the impact, which is a terrible incentive. So that's what I mean as the hot potato. And so we're going to get bad outcomes because everyone's afraid to touch it, which is really tragic because humans are bad drivers in general. And I think that the whole idea of putting us behind the wheel was a mistake. Horses could have autopilot, cars don't, right? And so, it's dangerous. And thousands of people are dying every day from car accidents. The ironic part is that although I don't think AI driving is roadworthy yet, I think it will be roadworthy way before we're willing to accept it. I think it will be less dangerous than the human driver before we're willing to accept it.
Yeah. Don't just necessarily disagree with you there, despite the fact that I am a gearhead. John, it's been an interesting, fascinating conversation. I thank you for coming out. Before we wrap up here, I do got a last couple questions. And the first one is a question I asked all my guests here at Moving Forward Leadership. And that is, according to you, John Wood, what makes a great leader?
It's a great question. I'm glad you asked us that. I think that a great leader is capable of seeing the world through the eyes of other people. And you can call that compassion or emotional intelligence or whatever it is, but leaders tend to be strong-willed and courageous and creative and executive types, and that's all very important. But what can't be lost is their ability to see things through the eyes of the people they're supposed to be leading. And if you can do that, you're going to be a better leader because you're going to understand how your words and your actions are being perceived. And you're going to understand your relationship to stakeholders better. And that's going to include your shareholders, your board of directors, the people that you're accountable to. It's going to include the people that report directly to you, and it's going to include your customers. And so I think having that greater sense of awareness, it would be useful for leaders.
That's a great answer. Awesome. Last thing is, where can people find you? How can they follow you? Where's the book? All that stuff. Feel free to give yourself a shameless plug.
Thank you. The Humachine is available on Routledge's website. That's our publisher. They've been great. It's available on Amazon.com. You can get it in hardback, paperback, e-reader. We will be releasing an audiobook shortly after the new year. And you can find me on LinkedIn. Just look for John Wood, Humachine on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter, John Wood Torch. That comes from my favorite quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, that a learned man is a torch. So you can find me on Twitter, John Wood Torch. And so humachinebook.com is the book's website, and you can get it online.
Awesome. For the audience, as always, it's easy for you folks. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/101, and all the links are there in the show notes. John, again, it's great to having you. Thanks for finally coming out and getting on the show and having this conversation with me today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right, that's all I got for you fine folks today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And most importantly, I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, remember, R squared, S squared, right? Rate and review the show so that it gets a little bit noticed, a bit more. But most importantly, I can help more people, because that's what I'm here for. That's what my guests are here for, is to help more people become better leaders and not being bosses, right? So remember that. R squared, rate and review. S, share the show. Share this show with someone who you think can relate to the podcast as a whole and today's topic. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And you can do that via your podcast playing app of choice through movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.